So I guess to start, I'd love to know where you even start when you come to something like the Beatles archive. I imagine there's just a crazy wealth of footage and people you could talk to and people who want to talk to you about it. So when you're coming to approach making a Beatles documentary, where do you even begin?
I think it started before we started, meaning I was with Jack Douglas, who's in the film, a month before we knew anything about this project. And he had mixed the music for Personality Crisis, a film we had worked on about David Johansen. And we were at the Savannah Film Festival, and we were sitting in the park. And he told me this remarkable story about how he heard the Beatles for the first time and how it just changed the entire trajectory of his life. He wanted to be an actor. He decided he wanted to become a musician. And he, as a result of listening to the songs and loving the music so much, he went to Liverpool. And that was the beginning of many changes for him. And that was in the back of my mind when I first talked to Apple Corps, who had this unbelievable treasure trove of footage from 1964 shot by these great New York filmmakers, David and Albert Maysles. So I would say that was, for me, that was the start.
And one of the things I think when you're making any documentary, but certainly a documentary about such well-documented individuals and a band that, there's no one in the world that probably hasn't heard of the Beatles. If they haven't even heard their music, they know that band exists. You want to try to find any material that's never been seen before. And that's a kind of a long process, and we only really had a year and a half or so, probably like 6 months of research before the edit room opened. So there was this real need to find things in archives from collectors, within the Apple archive itself that had just never been seen before. So that was a real focus, and we were lucky enough to connect with some collectors and fans from that era. There was a fan who had beautiful 8mm color footage that had never been seen before, and then there was a lot of other material in archives that had just never been unearthed, 16mm news footage that maybe showed at that time but hadn't been seen since, that we could newly transfer and use, so that everything had a seamless flow from the beautifully restored Maysles footage to then all the beautifully restored archival third-party footage that we found. We wanted it to be a seamless experience for people.
And what was it about this 64 tour that kind of jumped out and grabbed your attention? I feel like the Beatles have so many different eras and did so much that there's a million different things you could focus on. So what was it about this tour, and why did you think the story of it needed to be told now?
Well, we had worked on a documentary about George Harrison, Not Living in the Material World, that Martin Scorsese directed. I edited, Margaret produced. But it put us in the world of George Harrison. We knew, even without working on the movie, we were all very familiar with Beatles music and the Beatles story. But personally, I always think about the later years of the Beatles. And this footage captures this unbelievable moment at the beginning when they're so optimistic and young and enjoying themselves and can't quite believe what's happening, which is this unprecedented success. So they're in the plane coming to America for the first time, and they have no idea what's going to happen. They don't know if anyone will be waiting for them. And there's something about that story of Beatlemania had already started, so it's not their first success, but it's when their success became worldwide. And of course, it's the land, America I think was almost mythical for them. All their musical heroes were American, and that was part of coming to America. They thought, they would meet the Miracles and the Isley Brothers, and they had already, toured with Little Richard. So it felt like a great story to tell.
It also came on the heels of, one of the great national tragedies in our country. And so one of the things that David and Martin Scorsese do so beautifully in their documentary films is kind of set the cultural context. These musical events happen, and a lot of times they're strung together like this, this highlights reel, but everything happens within, a context of, the mood of a nation, what other things that are going on culturally. So you have this tragic event that is, causes the country to fall into this kind of gloom and this, just shock, really, that I don't think we've actually recovered from. And so people were in a certain emotional state and an emotional place, and then the Beatles come, and it's, they would have been a popular band, they would have had success, but it's kind of almost like a deeper thing that happens where Paul describes it beautifully in the film. People are lifted out of their sorrow.
Thought it was interesting, you say kind of about Beatles in this state of optimism, and considering the fact that only 2 years later they'd say they didn't want to tour anymore, and there'd be the incident with John saying they're bigger than Jesus, and kind of America almost, or like a portion of America turning on them, and it becoming, the next time they toured America, it being a very scary experience for the band. Do you think when you were kind of reviewing all this footage, do you think you saw any glimmers of that like early anxiety about the scales that their fame was hitting?
There was a lot of early anxiety on our part, So I'll give you one example, and this is part of the innocence of the time. There's a scene where Paul is just sitting there eating in his hotel room at the Plaza Hotel, eating chocolates, reading the note that some fan just sent the chocolates, and he ate them. And you're like, wait, don't eat that. But of course, it was a simpler time, and he didn't. The chocolates were not laced with anything except maybe hazelnut, and he was, it was fine. And I don't think there's one point where on the plane where Harry Benson talks about John mentioning Lee Harvey Oswald. He talked about Lee Harvey Oswald and how he thought that how the joy or the enthusiasm or the hysteria, the emotional reaction that they would get, how it could turn. And that was very disturbing for many obvious reasons. But for the most part, no. What you see is just 4 young guys, having the time of their lives, reaching unfathomable success.
You do see a little glimmer in the British Embassy scene where they're just being groped, and you see this incredible image of a man like reaching over Paul's shoulder and grabbing something from his pocket, and it's like they are having a good time, but not there. And John, in a later interview that we include in the film, just talks about it was like Hard Day's Night, but almost a million times worse. So they are aware that there is this darker side to fame that obviously it's a cliche, but it's so true that things are great until they're not. And then we had interviewed Ringo Starr for the George Harrison documentary years ago, and he just talks about how you want fame, everything you're doing is working to get that level of success and fame, and then once you've got it, you can't turn it off, right? Then it doesn't stop. But he says that's the deal. And so they were aware of it, and but this tour is decidedly on the sunny side of things.
Yeah, we're now decades on from this tour and decades on from the Beatles' career, but it feels like people's interest in this band never stops. If anything, every year more fans get added to their pool of fans. Why do you think that is, and what do you think that the world still has to learn about the Beatles that kind of surprised you in this process?
It's really hard to say, but more than anything else, the music, it's great music, and it enhances our lives in a very deep way. And I think that's part of the mystery. It's the mystery of music. David Lynch says it in the film, that it creates all these emotions and thoughts, and it's just 12 notes. I think that's the basis, that it's almost, we have many people talking about how music has an impact on you in the film, but ultimately it's a mystery. And I think that's part of why we're still thinking about it. When you have these four guys, from the point of view of an American, four guys who came out of nowhere. As Joe Queenan says in the film, they were from Liverpool, they might as well have been from Mars, who created something that's, in a way still going strong.
They also, as a band, they were kind of like a comet or something, right? They went across the sky and then they stopped. They stopped at the top. And I think that adds to the feeling of wonder about the band, as you have, many, many bands that started around the same time that are still out there performing, and we love that. Like, we love bands that have, gone on, and musicians that keep, Dylan should play music as long as he's on this earth, right? But there is something very intriguing about something so brilliant splitting up and going their own ways. And I think that adds to the mystery.
And then as a final question, I'd love to get both of your favourite Beatles songs.
It's so hard. I kind of don't even know if I could do favorite album. I say Revolver, but there's so many great songs on every record. I could hardly do my favorite John, George, Paul, Ringo song. It's just, I don't know. It might depend on where I'm at in my life, because I think when I was younger, I had favorite songs, and it changes over time. I really love the song Across the Universe. I really love Here Comes the Sun, maybe one of the greatest, songs for just feeling alive and human in the springtime, But it's kind of impossible to choose, I think.
I feel the same way. It's very difficult to choose one. And it's not just where I am in my life, it's like what time of day. I will say I blasted back to the USSR this morning, because it really gets me, energetic. Within You, Without You, at the end of the day, somehow it always takes me somewhere. It gets inside of me. Across the Universe, and every single Ringo song.
Do you have a favorite?
I'm kind of the same. It changes every day, but I guess that's the magic of the band. There's literally a song for any single feeling you could ever have.
Yeah.
I recently went and saw the bootleg Beatles, and that was like such a strange experience, because they're like, I didn't realise how long they've been going, and the crowd reacts like I imagine a crowd back then would have reacted.
Oh, wow.
Oh, cool.
Oh, wow.
They're so musically on point from the band. It feels like you're in this weird time machine. So if you
that's
ever
so
get a chance
cool.
to see them, highly recommend.
Well, I wonder if there's Beatles cover bands that have been together longer than the Beatles themselves.
I'm sure. Yeah.
The official bootleg Beatles started in the 60s when the
Oh.
Beatles stopped touring.
Really?
They've been going a long time.
Wow.
Quite a while.
Yeah.
Wow. And different players over time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's rotated
Yeah.
them in.
Yeah. That's fun.
Cool.
Thank you.
That's nice
Thank
to
you.
talk to you, Lucy.